Alessandro Scarlatti was born May 2nd, 1670, in Palermo, Sicily. He died in October 1724 in Naples. I'm sure most of us would expect that a 1693 manuscript of a complete work by Alessandro Scarlatti would be somewhere in the archives, the libraries, the museums of Naples or Rome. However, the original first manuscript of this magnificent work was found not in Rome or Naples, in fact, not even in Italy. It was found in the collection of the Lloyd W. Smith archives at Washington's headquarters in Morristown, New Jersey.
It's not every day that you actually get a chance to take a period, actual real manuscript, and bring it to life.
La Giudita is the biblical story of Judith and Holofernes. It's expanded by Ottoboni and Scarlatti for this dramatic work. Holofernes is the Assyrian general besieging the city of Betulia. Holofernes is a strong, vital, virile character. He's a strong, confident leader. He's sexually very attractive. Everything about him is a winner. The heroine of our story is Judith, Giudita. Giudita is a very complex character, developed through the text, but even more through Scarlatti's magnificent music. She wavers somewhat because she is emotionally drawn towards the strong character of Holofernes. And yet her faith remains strong. Her devotion to her people, to the city of Betulia, remains strong. The scene, the climactic scene, is one of the most powerful in 17th century opera, where she, obviously, it's a love scene with her and Holofernes, and then she gets him drunk, satisfied, he falls to sleep, and she kills him. So it's a very wonderful, dark, tragic, and yet victorious story, told so magnificently in the text of Cardinal Ottoboni and in the magnificent music of Alessandro Scarlatti.
It was such an honor to play this opera, because imagine playing a piece of music where you had the original manuscript right in the venue, and a piece that when you hear the performance today, there are many arias that are not included, and we got to play a lot of the arias, and the cast was wonderful. They did a tremendous job with all of these arias, and again, they were able to sing arias that they couldn't even listen to another performance to see how other performers sang the aria, and it was really a first for them, so they got to add their own creativity to it.
1693 version of Alessandro Scarlatti's La Giudita was not known. Nobody knew where the first edition was. And it wasn't until Bob basically resurrected it. I like to say I found it. I wish I could say it was a great kind of Indiana Jones story. It wasn't that much of above ground archaeology, but nonetheless, Bob was the one who really resurrected it and turned it into a performance.
Just looking at the manuscript, you can see how meticulous he is, and also the music is unbelievably beautiful. I had read that he had really tried to work on the recitatives to get the dramatic intent, and that's wonderful. But what's surprising to me is how absolutely gorgeous the melodies are in the sinfonias, in the arias. just absolutely beautiful.
One of the things that is sometimes considered strange to audiences who are not used to coming to a Baroque concert is when you have the main character, the main male lead, who is supposed to be this strong, virile, big guy, this hero, and it ends up being a countertenor singing the role. And I know even when we did the performance in Morristown, there were people who came up to me and said, why would I use a countertenor voice for this character who is supposed to be this great lover? And it has to do with one of the difficulties in bringing Baroque opera to life in the modern era. The opera is really a Baroque creation. The whole concept, so much of what we associate with music grew out of the 17th century. And opera was created around the year 1600 and spread enormously rapidly, perfected by composers like Claudio Monteverdi and others. And the first superstars of music anywhere, the Elvis Presleys, the Bruce Springsteens, the Michael Jacksons, all derive from opera singers of the 17th century. And the big superstars were the sopranos, male and female. And therein lies the problem. There are no male sopranos. It's not a natural voice. And it gave rise to one of the most strange phenomena of the whole Baroque period, and that's the popularity of the castrato. And young boys who had promise of a vocal career, before their voice changed, before they reached puberty, they would have gone through the procedure and became castrati. Those who went on to fame became wealthy, international celebrities. There are instances of singers like Farinelli who would arrive in town and have thousands of people screaming just to meet him. And they were the superstars, and they sang these lead roles. So when we bring it into the modern era, we're faced with the challenge. We can rewrite the music and maybe use a baritone, but then the balance, the great duet between Giudita and Holofernes, some of the sensuality and passion is because it's two voices that are in the same range. They're not an octave apart. And that adds a special intimacy to it. So if we transpose the music for a baritone or tenor, the whole texture would change, the whole intimacy would change. So then we're left with two alternatives. We can have another female sing the role, which many opera companies do. They use another soprano or a mezzo-soprano to sing what would have been sung by the castrato. Or what is developed in the past 25, 30 years is the rise of the professional countertenor. And so in order to bring these roles to life, we use a countertenor, and for this performance, we had Daniel Schutz, who came here from Illinois to perform the role of Holofernes. And that's why when you see these big, strong, super masculine heroes, they sing with the countertenor voice.
I definitely have arias from La Giudita that I prefer, or that are my favorites. I think all singers have preferences. There's a lot of great music in the score, but I would have to say my favorites are both my opening aria, the Trumpets of War, and then the final aria, and they actually have a lot of things in common. They're both very victorious, they're both in major keys, which is different than a lot of Giuditta's material, a lot of minor keys in some of her pieces. But the Trumpets of War, she's very strong entrance. Giuditta's talking about her strength and the strength of her people, which is fantastic, and it's very fun to sing these long-running passages in this fast tempo, and then it gets even more interesting on the repeat section when, like all singers can in Baroque pieces, I can make up my own things within reason, change the melody around and give little ornaments, and that's one of my favorite things to do with Baroque music, and there's a lot of room in La Giuditta for that, especially I think in this first aria.
You know more about the history of the area than I did. When Scarlatti wrote this in 1693, was Morristown already a town?
No, Morristown was not a town. New Jersey was a colony, but New Jersey was still split between East and West Jersey. And this area would have been, well, as a matter of fact, the area that we're in, this was part of the Ford estate, the Jacob Ford estate. The founder of that branch, the family, was still living in, I believe it was Connecticut at the time. He didn't move down here until a little bit later in the 1690s. So this is, when Scarlatti was writing this was still very much a rural area. The original 1693 manuscript, and it's part of the larger Lloyd W. Smith archival and rare book collection. I said we're standing here in the Lloyd W. Smith Manuscript Gallery, and why we have the manuscript is a story unto itself, but it was purchased by Lloyd in 1927, I believe, if according to the records. We don't know if he specifically bought it because he had an interest in Scarlatti. More than likely, he bought it because it was part of a lot that had other things in it at this auction that perhaps he wanted, and the Scarlatti just came along with it.
One of the really amazing things about this manuscript, in addition to the music, is the fact that the original dedicatory letter is here. It's attached to the manuscript. So we can see Scarlatti's address to his patron, and then when we turn the page, we have all Scarlatti's instructions, thoughts on performance, everything that is important to the period in his handwriting, and eventually at the very end of the letter we have it signed by Alessandro Scarlatti.
So we got to take this beautiful manuscript, talk about writing. You have to look at the manuscript. The calligraphy is absolutely wonderful. I wish we could do that today.
The Alessandro Scarlatti manuscript has a lot of interesting conservation needs because it's a bound manuscript, but it's also got some properties of a traditional book. So you'll see here, this is a probably early to mid 19th century binding or rebinding. You can see this kind of cheap pasteboard. You can see some of the conservation needs here, that it's already kind of fallen apart. If you take a look right here, you can see that the book is suffering from what we call red rot. It's where the cheaply tanned leather starts to decay. We see this a lot in 19th century books. We believe that Lloyd Smith possibly purchased this for the manuscript that is tipped in here. We believe this because he really doesn't have any other musical compositions in his collection. We do see a lot of bound manuscripts and rare books in print form, but not really any musical compositions, so this is unique for Lloyd Smith. The letter here was tipped in later. You can see the place where it was inserted. And then if you look really closely at these gatherings here, you can see an earlier binding.
The first rehearsal was a summer evening up in Morristown in the mansion that has the library where the actual manuscript was discovered. And my GPS was completely off and I was late, and a few minutes late, and I came in and finally parked, and I couldn't figure out where the door was, and I ended up walking through the woods with my cello, and I came upon the back part of the mansion, which is really the front sort of facade, and there's a ballroom there with enough space for an orchestra, and the keyboard is there and so forth. And floor-to-ceiling French windows and these beautiful lit curtains, and the windows were all open and the curtains were billowing out, and the sun was coming in sideways through the trees in Morristown, and it was pretty heavily wooded up there, and it was this magical moment of coming through, stepping in between the curtains and into this room where the orchestra was playing, and the manuscript itself, that had been touched by, written by Scarlatti. I mean, it's a religious experience practically. And Bob was conducting, and the singers were so wonderful, and I just slipped in with my cello and joined in, and it was just really a wonderful kind of first experience with the piece. So it will always, hold a special place in all of the music that we've played with Bob.
I think I found the most challenging thing about this role was when Scarlatti originally wrote this oratorio. It was a lot longer, obviously. The manuscript that was discovered was a lot longer than what research has shown the first performance was back in the 1690s. And it turned out that the majority of the music that was cut from the original performance belonged to my character, Ozia. And when I went to learn this music, it is incredibly difficult, incredibly melismatic, and no one had ever sung it before. So I was learning it all on my own. I had nothing to base it on. I had nothing to listen to for guidance. So it was just very challenging, from everything we could tell, I am the first person who's ever sung any of this music. There's only a little bit of pressure there, and I wanted to make it as good a performance as possible. I wanted to make sure that this being the first time that maybe anyone has heard the music of that character, that they went away with a feeling of, this was great, this was beautiful music, and I'm glad I got to hear it. And I think I accomplished that, and I hope that I did.
Nostro severo minaccia catene al misero bien. Minaccia catene al misero
One of the great things about Morristown National Historical Park, beyond our obvious history, the Revolutionary War, George Washington, and the ever so important encampments that took place here at Morristown, is the collection. The park has a broad and varied collection of incredible manuscripts, of incredible artifacts, and one of them is the Alessandro Scarlatti music artifact that obviously was something that was discovered a few years ago, and we were very honored to work with the Baroque Orchestra of New Jersey.
The most difficult thing with editing the Scarlatti manuscript was realizing the parts that were not in the other editions, were not in the other manuscript, the later manuscript. But for the most part, it was pretty straightforward. The paper is so in such wonderful condition, the ink is so rich, everything is clear, it's there. Occasionally, I might have difficulty reading some of the text, some of the libretto, some of the words are uncertain. I've basically had to go back and judge by how the Italian would be, but of course, we don't know the changes that have occurred in the language over the course of the last 300 years. But for the most part, it was pretty straightforward in editing. One of the things that is immediately noticeable and is something that is involved in the editing and bringing to life of the manuscript, more so in the stylistic performance, is the fact that Scarlatti represents a sort of middle ground in the Baroque period. And we don't have as many recordings, and there hasn't been as much research and analysis done of the middle Baroque of the late 17th century, whereas we have lots of studies of music by Monteverdi, by the English composers of the early 17th century, by Cavalli, and so on. And then there's this sort of a gap until we get to the high Baroque, the music of Handel and Vivaldi and Telemann and Bach. So trying to fit Scarlatti into this middle ground was a little bit challenging for me to conduct and for the orchestra to play and for the singers to interpret, because parts of it sound early. They sound almost Monteverdian, especially the choruses have a Monteverdi type sound to them. The other arias, some of them sound Cavalli-ish or mid-century, and then other ones sound like Handel. So there's this middle ground that is interpretively new to study, trying to find where the balance is between making it sound too early and making it sound too late, but making it sound just right for Scarlatti.
I really think this aria is very beautiful. It's in a standard ABA form, but in the Morristown edition, Scarlatti actually repeats the entire aria with different words. That's a little bit unusual, and I think maybe because Scarlatti himself thought that it was a very beautiful aria. One thing that I really like about the Captain's Aria in Act 1 is that the music really allows for a lot of improvisation and creativity on the singer's part. Typically, once you repeat part of the aria, you are expected to add your own kind of flavor and ideas. And this aria is great for that. Usually you do that in most Baroque music, but especially in this aria and a lot of Scarlatti, you really have a lot of space and a lot of ability to be very creative.
My second favorite aria is, of course, the finale, which one of the reasons I like it is because Giudita and Ozia, two of the main characters, actually share the same music. It happens quite often in this opera, which is really, really interesting, I think. But a lot of our previous music is a little bit slower tempo or a little bit sadder, and this is the big ending piece. It's the finale. It also is in a major key, which I love, and it offers some chances for some ornamentation, for some nice high notes, which I love because I'm a soprano. And it's just a really great triumphant way to end this opera that's had a lot of darkness in it, but it ends on a very positive note.
I would have to say that my favorite aria in the entire oratorio would have been my character, Ozia's aria, Addio cara libertà. It was just heart-wrenching. It's, you know, my character has lost all hope. I expect that I will be dying very shortly, and I'm saying goodbye to my homeland that I love so much. And it was just a beautiful aria. The music was stunningly gorgeous, and just to be able to put that emotion into it and get to sing such a lovely melody, even though it was so sad. It was just a beautiful moment, and I absolutely love that aria. So I would love to sing that one again. I think everyone should hear that aria. It's absolutely beautiful.
The other thing that struck me was the character that I sang was a priest, and there wasn't a great deal that I had to sing, but I thought it was a very telling moment that Judith was seducing the Syrian general, and the priest was calling her traitor, traditor, and I think he was probably giving voice to what a lot of the people thought about it was. They thought she was really a traitor, and they didn't realize that she was actually their savior until she came back with the Syrian general's head disembodied from his disembodied from his body. That sounds a little redundant, doesn't it?
For me personally, this kind of collaboration between a historic organization and an arts organization, and then turning this above ground archaeological discovery into a performance with live performers and live audience here today in the 21st century in Morristown, New Jersey, with this incredible manuscript that was discovered right here in Morristown, is just a phenomenal example of the way the organizations in this community work together to bring out the very, very best that we have to offer.
One of my favorite parts of the whole Scarlatti oratorio is this aria that he has in two different parts. One is sung by Ozia, and then the other by Giudita. Ozia's version is in all the manuscripts. Giudita's version is not. It's only in the Morristown manuscript. I worked around with the instrumentation a little bit. One of the nice things about playing Baroque music is that you can alter the orchestration so that even in the Baroque times, it would have been performed possibly in many different ways. There's a lot of room for flexibility and improvisation. So what I did was I took what Scarlatti indicated to be for violin and cello, or violone, or viola. It's not clear in the manuscript. And I also orchestrated it for flute and oboe. And Laura and Nancy did a wonderful job on it. What we decided is the first time through, only the flute and oboe would play. The second time through, when Giudita is singing her verse, we will use the flute and the oboe with the violins and the violas and the cellos, so that we get a fuller orchestral sound. I think that the two versions are extremely important, even though, for whatever reason, Scarlatti discarded the Giudita's version of the aria. They frame the whole climactic segment of Holofernes and Giudita, their love scene, the prayer scene, and the climactic murder scene, and they represent the two different characters, their approach to life. And so for that reason, I think it is important to have them both. Ozia, at the beginning of the scene, is expressing fear, trepidation, the feeling of hopelessness, that one has faith, but it looks better to capitulate because there is no hope. And Giudita, after having done what she needs to do, she says, there is always room for hope. There's always room for faith. And through this, we can be victorious. So the music is the same, but the words are different, and the timing is so critical because on the one hand, we have Otsia expressing doubts and fear and trepidation. Then we have this whole wonderful scene, this action scene that Scarlatti creates, followed by Giudita singing about how the same emotions of fear and trepidation can instead lead to action and victory.
We like to invite visitors to Morris County so that they can discover the cultural and heritage richness that abounds here. And what I find particularly interesting is this intersection of history and culture that can be found at Morristown National Historical Park within the Lloyd Smith Collection. To have discovered the Scarlatti opera there within the manuscripts completely by surprise is really something that visitors need to be aware of. They need to touch it and feel it and experience all that the collection has to offer. Morristown is host to the first National Historical Park. And when visitors come to Morristown, I think that they're not really aware of the breadth and the width of what that park encompasses. So my job is to promote all that there is to see and do here in Morristown, and to be able to leverage the Baroque Orchestra of New Jersey's relationship with the National Park vis-a-vis the opera is very important.
One of the more interesting things about this opera, about Scarlatti's approach, and in the same sense, the librettist approach, Ottoboni's approach, is the development of scenes. I was a little bit surprised. It's not just entrance and exit arias, even though most of them are da capo arias and most of them are continuo arias, which are similar to what we find in later Baroque operas. But there's long, extensive scenes. Especially moving to me is the climactic scene, the most important scene, the confrontation with Holofernes and with Giudita. It's very erotic, it's very sensual, and it's very moving. And Scarlatti develops this, along with the librettist, in a way that is very logical, very dramatic, very highly dramatic, in almost a modern sense. We find that it starts with dialogue, with little flirting dialogue between Holofernes and Giudita, with each other. We know that she's there to seduce him, as well as to kill him, but we sense that attraction to each other, that there is something there, and it's in Scarlatti's recitative.
Connettere i tuoi figli senza contrasto alla città in senno.
One of my favorite parts of the entire opera is the duet. It's so unlike any duet I know in the 17th century, other than an earlier duet by Monteverdi from the Coronation of Poppaea. It's very sensual, it's very warm, and it's the big climactic moment. What are your feelings about that duet, and what were your feelings singing it?
I agree with you. The duet is fantastic. It's one of my favorite moments also of the entire show. And it was very interesting singing, and it's always interesting working off of another singer. Duets are one of my favorite things to do just because it adds that other layer. It's much more interesting to have someone to not just interact with on the stage, but to interact with vocally. And this piece in particular has a lot of sections in it, and it's almost organized as though, it's meant to be a love scene. So you see that in Scarlatti's writing of it. It starts at a very slow pace, almost just flirtation, like you're dipping your toes into the water, and then it starts to get more rapid. And as the pace builds up, the tempo speeds up. It's almost like you're moving past that from foreplay into what it is making love. That's what the scene is about. That's what Giudita is doing. She's gone to conquest this man, and she succeeds. And by the end of the piece, the tempo slows back down into this nice, slow melody that they sing together. And the harmonies are very interesting. It was a little hard to learn at first because there's some things in there that are just not exactly what you would expect from Baroque music. But I think that all plays into this emotion and what's supposed to be going on with the scene. It's not your everyday duet. I think there's something more at play. It's very dramatic, and I think that drama is what drives everything from the tempos that Scarlatti chooses to those little tiny harmonies that are just a little bit off.
Following this wonderful duet, we have the scene, more dialogue. They talk to each other. We can tell that Holofernes is definitely in love with Giudita. We can almost picture him sitting on her with his head on her lap, following their love making. And he sings about how beautiful she is, and she tells him to go to sleep. And then she tries to pray. She starts to pray, give me strength. Give me the strength to do what I have to do, what I've come here to do. And she almost hesitates. So we sense that there's some attraction of some kind at some level. But before she prays very much, she's interrupted because Holofernes awakens. He's not fully asleep. And he says, what are these words? What are you saying? She comforts him, and he falls asleep. But not quite, because she starts to pray, and again he awakens and talks to her, questions what she's talking about. then we have this incredibly miraculous music that Scarlatti puts for that. When Holofernes he's obviously a little bit drunk. Maybe he's drunk in love, drunk with celebrating, having some wine together, and he definitely falls into a deep sleep. The music, it's very chromatic, very strange harmonies, and the vocal line just dies out as he falls asleep, and the bass line and the continuo play these chromatic harmonies that he falls asleep to. Once he is definitely asleep, Giudita sings her prayer, which is this incredible music imploring God's help for her to do what she needs to do. And as she calls upon God to give strength to her arm and her hand to do what she needs to do, we now have the full orchestra playing. So whereas when she was hesitating and when Holofernes kept waking up, it was just the continuo. But now that she's going to say the entire prayer and is leading to the act, we have the whole orchestra playing, and the aria is allowed to play out to its conclusion.
Unbelievably beautiful.
Having the opportunity to bring something like La Giudita to life is an amazing thing for a singer. Everyone in the cast was terrific.